Hello everybody. In today's video we're going to be doing a valve adjustment on my 2002 Acura TL-S with 340,000 miles. More specifically, this car has a V6 J series engine, and while this video will pertain to most Honda and Acura vehicles, getting to the actual valves themselves can vary from engine to engine, but the actual valve adjustment itself is pretty much the same. So before we begin, why don't you go ahead and click that like and subscribe button. It certainly helps me out a lot. Also, feel free to check out the description where there will be more timestamps to better navigate through the video, as well as more information about this job, links to parts, torque specs, etc. So why don't we begin? So the most common reason to do a valve adjustment is mainly because of engine performance and sound issues. A lot of people will experience a tapping or ticking sound coming from the engine when the valves are loose and need adjusting. Other people might experience some misfire codes, maybe a loss of power, rough idle, difficulty starting the engine. And so the average time to need to do this is every 1 to 200,000 miles. It's been about 220,000 miles for me actually. I've been putting this off for a little bit and now it's time to finally make a video. So I've cut ahead a little bit. I've already removed the intake manifold just for filming purposes, but what we're going to quickly do is inspect all of the gaskets around the valve covers. Each one is held on by these 5 bolts, which also have a rubber gasket on them. And you can see there's a good amount of oil residue buildup surrounding these bolts. You can also kind of see in some of these spark plug tubes, it looks a little oily and dirty in there. So I'm going to replace the spark plug tube gaskets as well. And then looking at the edge where the cover and the actual valve body meets, same thing, a bit of residue buildup. And same thing on the back. We'll just check some of these bolts. Again, pretty dirty, pretty oily. And checking around the edges, you can see it's not very clean. So we will be replacing all of those gaskets. Now we're going to quickly purchase some parts and tools. So we're going to come to our favorite Acura parts website and we're going to enter our vehicle. I've got a 2002 TL-S. We'll come down to engine and cylinder head cover. And it's actually cheaper to buy the parts individually than to get these sets. So we're going to buy them individually. So we'll start with 2 head cover gaskets. Select a quantity of 2. Then we're going to need 6 of these spark plug seals. And lastly, we're going to need 10 of these head cover washers / gaskets. Quantity of 10. Then we'll come back to our menu. Select engine again, and then intake manifold. And then we need just a single one of these intake manifold gaskets. That'll bring our total to $107 roughly, plus shipping. We don't need to replace any of these metal gaskets. These are reusable. Now let's buy some tools. We'll start with this Powerbuilt 10mm adjuster tool. It's a 2-in-1. It has a screwdriver for adjusting the screw, and then it also has a socket for adjusting the nut. This is not a required tool, but it will certainly make it a lot easier and faster. We do need this though. This is a feeler gauge set, and this is what we'll be using to get that accurate measurement. More specifically, I recommend these offset feeler gauges. It's a lot better for getting in those tight areas and giving you a much more accurate feel. This is a 16-piece set and it ranges from 5 to 20 thousandths of an inch. This should be good for most vehicles, but you can always check the sticker under your hood to see what measurements you're going to need. So the very first step in doing this job is actually to let your engine cool down all the way. More specifically, you should let your engine cool down overnight to ensure that the engine is as close to room temperature as possible. Heat is a very big factor in the valve adjustment. We're talking about literally 1/1000th of an inch here. So make sure that your engine is cold before starting this video. Very important. First part we'll be removing is going to be the strut brace. It's held in by a couple bolts on each side, as well as some varying zip ties, maybe a couple clips here and there. So we'll get that all disconnected and remove that brace. You'll also have to remove these 2 covers right here, which are located at the top of the engine bay, and that will reveal just a couple more bolts. that we have to remove. Now we can remove the intake manifold covers, simply held in by 4 bolts for this top one. And then there are 2 little screw tabs that you'll kind of twist off with a screwdriver and you'll yank it on out. Now we'll come towards the back of the engine and we're going to remove a couple things, starting with this power steering hose bracket. It's held in by 1 bolt right there. Then we got this actuator. It's held in by 2 bolts, one right there and one right there. We'll remove the electrical connector as well. Then we're going to remove a couple bolts holding this ignition coil wire harness in place. There's 1 bolt right there. There's another bolt right back here, number 2. And then there's one way down on the side right here, number 3. Remove those bolts. Now we're going to remove the 6 ignition coils. It's simply held in by a 6mm hex key. Loosen that bolt, and then we'll undo the electrical connector. And then you can just simply pull it straight out like that. Now we're going to remove this airbox filter assembly, simply held in by these 2 bolts right there. And there's a couple hoses attached to it, one right there, one right there. There's also a C-clamp right there we got to remove, and then it'll just kind of come up and out. Now we're going to remove the throttle and cruise control cables. You can simply take a wrench and loosen this little nut back, and then we'll remove it from the actual retainer there. Next, we're going to work towards removing this piece of the air intake assembly that attaches to the intake manifold, and it's held on by a few things. You got to remove a couple electrical connectors. We have to remove this hose clamp right there, and there's a couple tubes we got to remove, and then it should essentially wiggle off. Don't forget the bolt way down there as well. So these tubes can be pretty hard to remove sometimes, especially if they haven't been touched in many, many years. So one tip I can give is to get a pliers like this, grip it, and you can almost essentially twist it off like that. Another tool you can maybe use is a pick tool like this. You can almost kind of like wedge it in there and kind of push up on it, or maybe put it at the edge like this and also kind of give it some assistance. But yeah, it's kind of hard, but you'll get it. It only takes a couple minutes. Also, as you remove a couple of these rubber hoses, some coolant is going to leak out, so just have a couple paper towels on hand to clean up any of the spills. So now we'll do pretty much the same thing with the throttle body. There's just a couple electrical connectors we got to remove, one more down there, as well as there's a pipe connected here. We'll disconnect it at the distal end, and then there's one more pipe right there. And then we're not actually going to disconnect the throttle body from the intake manifold. Once we remove this, it'll all come off as a singular piece. Coming in the back right corner, we also have 3 rubber hoses we got to remove, 1, 2, and 3, as well as this electrical connector. Coming in the back, we just have this one last little tube here to remove, and then we have to remove this cable right here as well. And then I believe we should be all set in removing this intake manifold. So first we're going to remove this top cover held on by these various bolts all the way around. Let's do that. Then we can remove the cover. So you can see it's a bit dirty. It's been about 200,000 miles, maybe 220,000 miles since this has last been removed. So we'll clean that up later. But now we're going to remove these bolts and then remove the entire intake manifold. Now we should be able to remove the intake manifold, and I'm going to set it on this piece of styrofoam. You're probably wondering, why don't you just take it all out? Well, I actually can't remove my cruise control cable. The plastic piece broke and I basically cemented it in, so I got to keep it attached. But yeah, let's see if we can get this bad boy out now. There we go. All right, and it is out. Let's set it on here. Perfect. Before we can take those valve covers off, we just kind of have to remove all the wires and whatnot that are in the way. So starting with these ignition coil wires, they're just held in by a couple clips on the front. We've also got this big tube right here that's connected to the side. Got to remove that. So the bolts holding the valve covers on are pretty fragile, so I would recommend not using any power tools, and I might also recommend using a little penetrating oil just to give yourself the best chance possible at removing these successfully. So here we go. It's one. It's two. Three. Four. And five. Perfect. Now we should be able to remove the valve cover. So let's try and lift it on up and out. There we go. Ta-da! And here we are. Looks pretty clean after 340,000 miles, huh? The power of frequent oil changes. This is what it'll get you. It'll make it significantly easier to work on too, because there isn't going to be a bunch of sludge buildup all over the place. All right. And it's ultimately these guys that we're going to be adjusting. You can see there's 4 per cylinder. 4 times 6 is 24. So we'll remove the back cover now, and then we'll get started. So I don't think you can entirely remove this wire harness, but there should be enough room to get this cover off. So I've got it loose. Let's give it a go here. There we go. Next, we just got to remove this camshaft cover here, so that way we can see our timing marks for when we're doing each individual valve. If you need to, you can remove this side bracket bolt right here in order to get access to that bolt way down in there. So I wasn't able to entirely remove this cover. There's a little notch down there that gets caught on the gear, and I'd have to remove the power steering belt to get it out, but that's fine because all we need to see are those numbers. You can see there's a 6 there, maybe a 3 down there, and in front of each of these numbers is a little notch. We need to line that notch up with that too, so we'll get to that in just a moment. The last thing we need to do before adjusting those valves is to remove the front passenger tire, and we're going to get a lawn extension with a 19mm socket, and in this little hole right here is a bolt that we can use to turn the camshaft, and we can line up those top dead center marks. So as we begin doing this, it's important to know where each piston is. So that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Furthermore, you'll notice how each piston has 4 valves. You got 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So this is all number 4 right here. Just like this is all number 5, this is all number 6. The ones located on the outside of the engine, as well as in the far back, those are the exhaust ones. The ones located closest to the center here, these are the intakes. So if you look up on your hood here, you'll see that there is a separate measurement for the intake and exhaust. The intake is smaller, and the exhaust has a larger adjustment that needs to be made. So I highly recommend getting these offset feeler gauges, mainly because you'll notice that there's really not a lot of room to be working around in here. And that's also a reason why some people tend to mess up this job, is because they're not putting their feeler gauge in perpendicularly, and they're also bending the feeler gauge. When you bend the feeler gauge and you have a tendency to push up on the rocker arm, and you're getting inaccurate adjustments, just like if you try going in at an angle, that's going to push up on the rocker arm too. You want to be all the way down, perpendicular, straight, not bent. You want to go in and out as straight as possible. You don't want to go in like this. You don't want to force it up and bend it. So when you're also grabbing it, you also want to grab it from the base. You don't want to grab it from up here, because that's going to throw off your accuracy, your measurements. It's going to bend it. More likely not going to be straight. is a very important part to do. So I would recommend taking the individual ones that you do need and removing them from the bundle, and then take the rest of this bundle and I would put it in a Ziploc bag with a little bit of oil, because these do have a tendency to rust pretty easy, so a little bit of oil will prevent that. So now it's time to line up our first cylinder. So we only want to turn it in the clockwise position for the most part. If we need to make like a microscopic 1/16 of an inch adjustment in the counterclockwise position, that's okay, but only major rotations in the clockwise direction. And what we'll do is we'll take the notch located on kind of by the teeth here, and we're going to line that up with the line on this back cover. You'll notice that some of these lines or these notches aren't directly on the teeth. Some of them are kind of like in between, so make sure you account for that when lining up the line. You can see this line is to the left of the tooth, and the line on this backing plate is also a little bit to the left of this tooth. And so we are at the top dead center for cylinder number 6. See, that's pretty well lined up. And which cylinder is cylinder number 6? I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. That one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we are going to adjust these valves, and you'll know that you're on the right cylinder because every single one should have a little bit of play. So remember, the valves closer to the center of the engine are for the intake valves, and for these we need our 8 and 9/10 thickness gauges. So the 8 should pass, the 9 should not, or at least it should be a very difficult pass for the 9. As you can see, my 8 goes in and out super duper easy. Let's see how well the 9 does. And the 9 goes in a little bit too easy for comfort as well. So we're going to definitely be adjusting this one. So let's put our 8 back in there. And we're going to take our valve adjustment tool, put that on there, line up the screwdriver, and we'll just crack the nut loose. There we go. And remember to not put any downward pressure on your screwdriver, because as you do that, you're pushing down on the actual rocker arm. And as you can see, I can't put it in and out easy anymore. And I let go of that downward pressure, now it works again. So keep that in mind as you're doing this. So let's give the screwdriver just a micro adjustment. Still pretty easy. There we go. Now a little bit more resistance. Maybe I could do just a tiny bit more. Oh, maybe that was too much. Let's back it off. There was some more. Yeah, find that perfect spot. I'm liking that. There's a good amount of resistance right there. So I'm going to stabilize my screwdriver, and we're going to lock the nut. There we go. Let's remove the tool, and let's test the 8 and 9 individually now. So the 8 is good resistance. Let's see how well the 9 goes in there, if at all. Here's our 9. And I'm having a hard time getting that in there. Let's try one more time. Yeah, first try with this. All right, that's always satisfying. Yep, I cannot get that 9 in there for the life of me. So we're going to stop with that. Let's double check our 8. There we go, perfect fit. And so now what we need to do is keep that little gauge in there, and we're going to torque that nut down to 14 foot-pounds. There we go. And we're going to double check our feeler gauges again, because every once in a while, as you torque it down, it can adjust that little screw. There's still a good amount of resistance and drag with the 8. Let's double check our 9. And I cannot fit that 9 in there, so hey, we've got one done. Perfect. Let's do the other intake one. So here's our 8. And it slides in and out nice and easy. Let's take our 9. And then the 9 also goes in and out a little too easy for comfort. So we're going to adjust this one as well. So again, we'll take our adjuster tool. Put it on there, loosen that nut. There we go. And let's grab our number 8, stick it in there. There we go. And let's just make an ever so slight micro adjustment with the screwdriver. Feeling a little bit of resistance. There we go, it's pretty tight. Might even be able to back it up just a hair. Yeah, I'm liking that right there. So let's stabilize our screwdriver. Snug the nut down. And let's double check our work. There's a decent amount of drag with the 8, while also being able to slide it with relative ease. Here's our 9. And I cannot get the 9 to go in, so perfect. And if you're able to get the 9 in by giving it a good amount of force, like if you really forced it in there and somehow managed to get it in, I wouldn't even bother adjusting it again, because if the 9 doesn't go in with ease, then I'd say you're okay. So I can't get it to go in at all, so even better. So I'm going to take it out. Let's put our 8 back in there, and we're going to torque that little nut down again to 14 foot-pounds. There we go. And triple check our work. Here's our 8. Slides good with a decent amount of resistance. Double check the 9. The 9 does not go in. Awesome. So I'm just going to continue the rest here, and then we'll start to put things back together. When you're all finished with the valve adjustments, you can then put the wheel back on and torque those lug nuts down. So next we're going to work at removing and replacing the gaskets. You can take a pick tool like this and just kind of dig it on under there, and the old one just comes out super easy. There we go. And we'll just clean up the edges here with a paper towel and a razor blade. So removing these gaskets are pretty hard. I feel like the best way to get them out is to use a really small flathead screwdriver, and we're going to ever so carefully hammer it in at the very edge. There we go. Let's see if we can kind of start to pry it out a little bit carefully. There we go. Start to make some progress. Let's get a bigger screwdriver now. And there we go. That one actually came out a lot easier than the first two, but there you go. Now we'll just clean out the inside. Next, we're going to take some 3M silicone paste, and we're going to just kind of lightly coat the outside of our new gasket all the way around. And same thing, we're going to coat the inside of the valve cover with a little silicone as well. Now we'll take our gasket and put it in. We got to be really careful about putting it in evenly. So we'll go nice and slow. Hope it doesn't jolt on us. Okay, got it partially started. Now what I've also got here is a 30mm socket, which fits the outer edge of it perfectly. So I'm gonna try and use that too to help put it in. Just a little bit at a time, make sure it's going in straight and evenly. Use your palm, really push in on it. Getting there. Eventually you'll reach a stopping point where by hand you just can't get it any further. And I'd say we are at about that point, in which case, now I bring out the big guns. a hammer. And we are going to just give it a good pound until it's flush with the surface. Here we go, we got all three of the gaskets in, looking pretty flush. And then we'll do the exact same thing with the other valve cover. Now what we're going to do is we are going to replace the gaskets on these valve cover bolts. So first we're going to kind of separate the washer there, then we'll separate the gasket from the washer. There we go. And I like to take a wire cutter and I'll just give it a little snip. There we go. And it comes right off. And we can take our new one and we need to separate that gasket from the washer again. So I'll get a little pick tool, kind of dig under there. Of course, the one I want to film has to be difficult. Here we go. Go. And then we'll take the washer, put that on first. We're going to take a little bit of silicone paste and kind of coat the back side of it. Stand the bolt up and we'll kind of press it on. Put it on at a 45-degree angle first, get that first little edge over, and then push it down the rest of the way. There we go. Kind of seat the washer and the gasket together. Wipe off any extra silicone. And there you go. Do that to the other 9. Next, we can put this front camshaft timing belt cover back on. Snug those bolts down. If you ended up removing that side bracket bolt earlier, the torque spec for it is 33 foot-pounds. So before we put these valve covers back on, we're going to take another look at these bolts because, again, they are rather notorious for breaking for a lot of people. One thing you got to remember is it's not the torque of the bolt that's holding the seal in. It's the gaskets. There's a rubber gasket on each of these bolts, as well as there's a gasket that goes all the way around. And so when you tighten these bolts down, you're going to feel it suddenly stop. And you don't need to torque it really hard. Just give it maybe a very light snug at best and call it a day, because that's not a very big surface area down there, and you're more than likely going to break it if you torque it down. So now we're going to put the valve cover back on, and we're going to put these bolts on in a very specific order, starting from the center and working our way out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You want to tighten them down in a 2 to 3 step process. You want to lightly snug them on, and then you want to essentially torque them on. You don't want to put them on tight, but so I've already got them partially started, so now I'm just going to get them kind of tight so there's a good amount of resistance. Also notice how I'm using my small ratchet. I don't want to take any chances at accidentally breaking these bolts. So there we go. I can feel that one's pretty snug. That one's snug. Now we're just going to kind of tighten them down to the point that you can feel the bolt essentially stop moving, as shown in that previous clip. Right there. I can feel it stopped. I've clearly reached the bottom. I'm going no further. Let's do the same thing for the others. And as you're tightening these down and reaching that point, you don't need to torque them also, because there's enough resistance in the washers and the gasket that'll prevent it from spinning back. So again, right there, I've reached the bottom, no further. You'll feel it, it's very obvious. There it is. 2 to go. Hey, I'm already there with this one. Perfect. And there we go. I've reached the bottom. No torque wrench needed. So before we put the exhaust manifold back on, we're just going to clean up the gasket of all that carbon buildup, as well as clean out any junk inside there. I just used a flathead screwdriver and scraped around a bit while holding my shop vac nice and close, and was able to clean it up really well like that. With the exhaust manifold all cleaned up and in place, we're gonna now tighten and torque these bolts. You have to do them in a specific order again, kind of from starting from the inside, working your way out. So that order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. We're gonna lightly snug them by hand, and then we're gonna torque them all to 16 foot-pounds. Then before we put this cover back on, we're going to do the same thing. Just take a screwdriver and our vacuum and try and clean up all this carbon buildup in there the best we can. Doesn't have to be perfect. We've got that cover on, and same thing with the exhaust manifold. We're going to snug these bolts down first, and then we're going to torque them to 8.5 foot-pounds. And again, in a specific order, kind of starting from the inside and working our way out. And this time that order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, let's torque them to 8.5 foot-pounds. Now we're going to start putting some of those tubes and electrical connectors back on, and there certainly are a bunch of them. So let's just go in a clockwise order. There's one right here. You got 1, 2, 3 right here. One more hidden underneath. You got this guy on top right there. You got 2 down here. 1 down there, 1 right here. Got a couple electrical connectors, 1 right there, 1 down there. And then moving forward, you got this big guy right here. Next, we can install our air intake control valve. You got this clamp here you'll have to tighten down. We can reinstall our cables. We can reinstall a couple electrical connectors. 1 more hidden down there. We've got a mounting bolt down there to connect. A couple tubes, there's 1 right here. Actually, I think that was the only one. We're gonna save this one for after we install the air box, which we're gonna do right now. There we go, we have our air box installed. We got these 2 bolts tightened down. We got this tube installed. We got this tube installed. We got this tube installed. Tighten down your C-clamp, and there we go. Now we're going to reinstall our ignition coil wires. This front one's simply held in by a couple clips. The one in the back is held in by 3 screws. We got the first one right there. Second one is right there. And the third one is tucked away a little bit further, right down there. And then we can install our 6 ignition coils. The torque spec for each of these bolts is 8.5 foot-pounds. And then we can reconnect the electrical connector. Next, we can reinstall this actuator here, held in by 2 bolts. Reconnect the electrical connector. We can put this power steering bracket back on, come around here, install our cable, as well as reattach the mount as well. Next, we can reattach this cross strut bar. It's held in by those 8 bolts, and each one is torqued down to 16 foot-pounds. And then just reconnect everything else around it. There's a bolt on the fuse box here. Reattach these little clips up there. bunch of little tubes connected here, clips, more clips. Don't forget to attach your cruise control or your throttle cable to right there. Since we lost a little bit of coolant earlier, removing some of those lines, we'll just make sure to top off our coolant reservoir to that max fill line as well. And then last but not least, we'll just attach the 2 exhaust manifold plastic covers and we are all finished. Now for the moment of truth, we're gonna start it up and hope everything runs okay. Well, there we have it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching my valve adjustment video. I hope this video was insightful to you all and could give you the confidence to tackle this difficult project. So don't forget to like and subscribe. It certainly helps me out a lot. I would certainly appreciate it. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I'm always good at getting back to people and answering any questions you might have about this difficult project. Also, check out the description where there's going to be links to parts, timestamps, torque specs, and all that good stuff. So, as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day and take care.